Game of Thrones ruined television. Now, I know it's going to sound insane coming from a guy who thinks it's one of the greatest shows ever made, but stick with me here. I've been sitting on this take for quite a long time. This is not like, another season 8 rant, because I've already done many of those before. Season 8 is honestly an easy target, and I think everybody's already made that video. So I'm here today to talk to you guys about what happened to the entire medium after Game of Thrones proved that a fantasy show could be the biggest thing on planet Earth. Because Game of Thrones did not just succeed. One simply does not succeed that much. It literally had every single studio and every streamer spending the next 7 years trying to reverse engineer the success of Game of Thrones, and almost every single one of them failed. We're talking billions of dollars burned. Yes, we're talking billions with a capital B. Entire franchises getting killed off, beloved book series adaptations getting canceled and destroyed, and a genre that's arguably in a worse shape than it was before Game of Thrones even aired. Yes, Apple TV, we're hoping you do some work with Stormlight Archive, because we need that thing to be peak, as well as whoever decides to buy the rights to Red Rising. Whoever does that, like, you've got quite the task. But before I go on a rant and talk about Game of Thrones, I have to give it its flowers, because honestly, if I skip this part, anything that I say afterwards is kind of meaningless. Game of Thrones is one of my favorite shows of all time. This thing won 59 Emmy Awards across the entire run, which is quite the record for a drama series. I think it is the actual record. And every season that went by, the audience just kept on climbing. Season 1 averaged around 9.3 million viewers. Season 7 averaged around 32.8 million. And then the season 8 premiere pulled 17.8 million people in night 1, which made it the most watched single day event in the history of HBO. And HBO's been around for quite a while. The finale itself on May 19th in 2019 brought in 19.3 million people. Why do I say that? Well, these numbers are absolutely insane. These things are not just TV numbers. These are like akin to the Super Bowl. And for a show about dragons and political intrigue, as well as a guy who drinks and knows things, yes, Peter Dinklage is the GOAT. Also, I still say the intro, Peter Dinklage, Peter Dinklage, Peter Dinklage. Yes, that's the intro. That's how it's always going to be. It's going to be the same way with Houses of the Dragon. It's not changing. Yeah, nothing has come close since. This is the peak. This is like the tippy top. And what did it cost us, guys? Well, everything. The second the Game of Thrones ended, every streamer on the planet went hunting, not for the next great show. Should we release quality? No, we just want to get Game of Thrones. We want something of the same scale, the same prestige, the same weekly event television energy. Streaming services went to the bookstore. They rated it for source material, but unfortunately, not a single person in the boardroom asked what made Game of Thrones so good. They actually asked the question, what did it look like? And then they ordered it. Amazon went after The Wheel of Time and The Lord of the Rings. Netflix went after The Witcher and Shadow of Bone. Yes, it still pains me today. Like, how do we have a show like The Witcher that started off pretty well, and then it just get to the point where it's like, what are we doing here? And same with The Wheel of Time. Like, I don't know how they actually managed to fail so epically with both of those shows. Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power, I've got my opinions on. I actually thought it's pretty solid. Like, it's just really slow at times. Also, it's kind of weird how they can't say, actual names. But here we are in 2026, and let me just kind of read you guys the scoreboard out loud. Shadow of Bone canceled in 2023 after 2 seasons. The Wheel of Time disgracefully ended after 3. The Witcher, after Henry Cavill walked out, we kind of already wrote off that show. Like, I was already pretty much done with it, but that's going to be ending soon. And out of the first wave of the big budget post Game of Thrones fantasy shows, The Rings of Power is basically the only one stood standing. Granted, I don't think Amazon is ever going to get rid of Lord of the Rings. Like, as long as they have the rights to that show, they're going to just keep on pumping it out. They've already confirmed that it will end its 5-season run, and that's just the bottom line because Stone Cold said so. And those are just some of the ones I'm mentioning. Like, there's so many other shows that are out that, also failed pretty epically. They were also trying to chase that Game of Thrones energy. But let's be real. Like, this is not like bad luck we're talking about. 4 entire, like, huge book franchises with real dedicated existing fan bases, and studios decided to just burn all of the goodwill, burn through all 4 of them, and so many others, chasing that lightning in a bottle that has not been repeated yet. Now, here's the part that really bothers me. Those books are not coming back. Nobody is going to be readapting The Wheel of Time in 5 years, at least not yet. Like, I think that needs a little bit more time to cook. It would be great to have a Wheel of Time adaptation that actually respects the source material, but we're going to have to wait quite a while for that. And the reason is because, they needed it to be Game of Thrones instead of letting it be The Wheel of time. Season 8 of Game of Thrones was running roughly $15 million per episode, which at the time was absolutely absurd for TV, but that actually became the new floor, not the ceiling. The Rings of Power reportedly cost somewhere around $1 billion for 2 seasons, which that's like the most expensive television series ever created. So kind of sit with that number for a minute. $1 billion. Yeah, it's probably a drop in the hat for Jeff Bezos at the end of the day. But whenever you look at a show like that and just like see what we got from it, $1 billion is a lot of freaking money. And when people talk about that show, the conversation is almost never about the story. It's about the problems. It's also about the budget. And that's kind of what happens whenever you spend like Game of Thrones without understanding why Game of Thrones worked so well. And what's funny is HBO is not immune to this either. Before House of the Dragon existed, HBO shot an entire prequel pilot called Blood Moon, set thousands of years before the show, built around the White Walkers and the Age of Heroes, and they spent reportedly $30 million on the pilot. And then of course they just scrapped it completely. $30 million for one episode that no one's ever gonna see. Now the reason it failed is the exact same reason that season 8 kind of like wobbled at the end. And that reason is that there was no source material underneath it. On that same day, HBO then greenlit House of the Dragon and sent it straight to the series with no pilot. So they literally lit $30 million on fire and they couldn't afford to do it twice. So they decided to just kind of send it. Now, House of the Dragon has improved. I thought season 2 was a little bit weak. Like it was, yeah, let's be real, it was kind of weak. Season 1 was straight up peak. I absolutely loved season 1 of the show. Season 3 started off strong, but overall it still kind of struggled, especially compared to how Game of Thrones did it so successfully. And I think the lesson that the industry took was to just spend more money. But the actual lesson should have been that Game of Thrones was small and cheap for 4 full seasons, while it earned the right to be expensive. Season 1 had a fraction of the budget and is still one of the best seasons of TV ever created, because it was never really about the money, it was about the writing. The writing was literally on point. Now, after episode 4 of season 8, a fan actually started a change.org petition to remake the season with quote-unquote competent writers. The petition set a goal of 15,000 signatures and it cleared 1 million in a matter of days, and it's now sitting somewhere around 1.8 million. A lot of people frame the fandom as, being entitled, and sure, I think some of it was. But there's something, a bit more important that, is buried in that number. Game of Thrones taught an entire generation of viewers that investing 8 years into a story is not safe, that the payoff might not ever come, and that the people writing it might run out of, road and just kind of sprint for the exit. Yes, we're talking about you, Dan and Dave. I hope you cook on Three Body Problem, but I'm still mad that you decided not to continue Game of Thrones and you just jumped to Star Wars, but then never got that. So I guess, karma happens, but but I think you can actually see the damage everywhere now. I don't know of many people that commit to a new show the same way they used to. Everyone kind of waits to see if a show gets renewed before they even start it. Everyone waits for the full season to drop, or they just, binge through the entire season and not have expectations that the thing will continue. And everybody asks whether the writers have an ending planned or if the source material is complete before they even give episode 1 a chance. And that behavior really didn't exist to this scale before 2019. That right there is the real damage in my opinion. It's not like a bad final season or, a mid-final season. It's a broken trust between shows and the audience that's watching them. But now let me, argue against myself real quick. I love doing this. I'm a schizo person. I'm not trying to be the guy that, only makes a case that sounds good. Let me actually take things a bit seriously for a minute. And honestly, some of it, kind of holds up regardless. You could argue that none of this is actually Game of Thrones' fault at all. The streaming bubble was already inflating. Netflix was canceling shows after 2 seasons before Game of Thrones ever ended. Interest rates went up, the money got tight, every studio started slashing expensive projects, and that's across every genre, not just fantasy. And with that being said, I think shows like The Wheel of Time didn't just die because of Game of Thrones. It died because Amazon looked at the spreadsheet and was like, okay, well, we can't keep spending money on this if it's not going to do as well as we want it to. But you could also argue that, the copycats failed on their own merits. Nobody forced the writers' rooms to make the specific choices they made. Blaming Game of Thrones for shows being mid is not really their fault. But regardless, here is why I still land where I land. Every single one of those shows was greenlit with a Game of Thrones shaped hole in the pitch. The budgets, the scale, the 8-episode prestige season, the fantasy source material specifically, all of it, tracks back to one show proving that at one time this could be the biggest thing on television. So yeah, the bubble was going to pop either way, and Game of Thrones was kind of the reason that the bubble got as big as it was in the first place. So here's my actual position, and it's not that, Game of Thrones is bad. bad, it's still near and dear to my heart. I think Game of Thrones is actually, you know, kind of a victim of its own self and its own success more than anything. I don't blame Game of Thrones for what came after. Dan and David didn't, like, you know, sit down and decide they were gonna poison TV for the rest of the decade and maybe even the foreseeable future or ever. They built something so big that the industry just couldn't stop staring at it. Here's the thing, you know, Game of Thrones was not a formula. It was actually like kind of a fluke in the best way possible. Like, could things be different if George R.R. Martin actually finished the source material entirely before they even aired the show? Sure, yeah, I mean, that's definitely possible. I think Dan and David were obviously better at adapting the actual novel than, you know, coming up with their own ideas. Look what they've done with Three Body Problem. In my opinion, that show has been really solid so far. Every show that like tried to copy Game of Thrones started at the finish line and then they worked backwards, and that's exactly why none of them landed well. So look, I think both things can be true at once. Game of Thrones is one of the greatest shows ever made, and it sent the industry in a 7-year, you know, hunt that cost billions of dollars. Like, this thing, you know, killed many major franchises, and it taught the audiences to be scared of committing to literally anything. The show itself didn't fail. It was the industry and the freaking suits that failed to understand it. But I've done enough yapping. I want to hear your guys' thoughts on this one. What is your take? If you could force one studio to take a book series back to a studio and kind of, you know, force them to adapt it properly, what is that book series going to be? For me, it's got to be either Stormlight Archive or Red Rising. I think, like, if HBO gets Red Rising, like, that could be the new Game of Thrones moment. And Apple TV already doing Stormlight, like, that is, you know, we're about to see peak fantasy very soon. But that's going to wrap it up with this video. Let me know what your thoughts are down in the comment section, and I'm not gonna lie with you guys. I'll talk to you guys in the next one.